Just something me on my.
I guess we can go ahead and get started. I want to make sure our speakers have enough time here. So welcome. Thank you for joining our session. Just a couple housekeeping reminders. So our speakers here, I think we're going to mute everybody on Zoom. So our speakers have kindly, if you'd like to ask questions during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and ask questions when you have them. The session is being offered. Hello to everybody who's out there on Zoom. We are offering this remotely as well and recording it. So if you, I believe through Zoom, they can use the comment function to ask questions if you would like to, if you're out there. If you have any questions, thank you to our Zoom manager, Joy, who's making sure this gets recorded, and Michael and Joy to make sure, I'll just thank everybody in the room, that this goes smoothly. So, and then within a week, this presentation and all the other presentations will be posted on the Processpalooza website, so you'll have access to the presentations. So, without further ado, very happy to introduce, and I'm going to probably mangle any titles, so I apologize. Oh, they're on the slide, so even better. So Melinda Hudson and Mike Spencer, who are both with coaches in transformational healthcare with UC San Diego Health. And they're going to be talking to you. You have a nice long description, but so I don't take up all their time. They're going to be talking about daily engagement system and how it works here at UC San Diego Health. So I'd like to thank him very much, and thank you so much.
Great. My name's Melinda. I'm one of the transformational healthcare coaches. Our team does a lot of process improvement across the entire health system. A lot of the pictures you'll see today have been in our pilot areas, which has been mainly in the ambulatory setting, but we're beginning to expand into the inpatient side as well. Just to get a read of the room, how many folks here have heard of a daily management system or a daily engagement system? And then how many folks here have taken some type of lean training, or is this your first exposure? Cool. Good to know. Where do I? Maybe exit and then try to go up.
Are you maybe just not focused on the PowerPoint presentation?
It worked just now, so I would like to just escape and then put it back into presentation.
Yeah. Just hit the escape button.
Yeah, it was working a second ago.
This is where I need to point.
It's Bluetooth. If you-
Can I point? Can I just click on here?
Alt tab to get back to the presentation. Just click on PowerPoint down there. There you go. Click on PowerPoint.
Yeah.
There you go. Click on it.
And then
Not that.
left.
Click out of presentation mode.
Just try something. No, this one. There we go. Okay. So we like to use the metaphor for
It depends on how many students. I get to know from where the problem is. I don't get to see the fact. No.
the bottom left hand side is the new. So there's three parts to our bicycle metaphor. Really, the back side, the back wheel of your bike is improvement. So it's are we doing our work correctly? So those are sometimes large scale problems that you're looking at. Maybe it's a rapid process improvement workshop, a Kaizen workshop. Then you have the alignment, which is are we doing the right work? So are we all aligned in the process improvement initiatives that we have going on? And then the piece that we'll be looking at today is the sustainment. So you're making improvements to problems that you see exist. You're making sure they're aligned to your vision, mission, and strategic goals. And then you're trying to sustain all of the goals that you're doing with those large-scale process improvement workshops. And then along the way, as you do large-scale workshops or small workshops and your daily engagement system, you're always using this problem-solving methodology that's known as PDCA, which is plan, do, check, act. Some places call it plan, do, check, adjust. And so the idea of that is that you're never fully done evaluating a process. You want to keep monitoring it to make sure that that process is sustaining its goals. So in terms of the org structure in a lean management system, we kind of flip the pyramid upside down. And the reason we show it like this is because the idea is that everyone within the organization, including what you would typically see at the top of your hierarchy, is supporting those who are delivering care to our patients. That's how we phrase it in the healthcare system, but if you're in another industry, it's anyone who's touching directly your customers. And there's three components. Just to let you know, if you've come from other systems that have used a daily management system or a daily engagement system, you might not have seen this exact acronym, but I have a feeling that you'll have seen some of the same themes and components. So for UCSD Health, we're going to go over a little bit of methodology of how we teach our daily engagement system. To start, the reason we call it DES and not a daily management system was because we wanted staff to really be engaged in the problem-solving part of the aspect. We didn't just want it to be a management structure, we wanted it to be just a little bit beyond that, where staff are active problem solvers. So for our DES model, we use this acronym AIR, and it's the three components of our daily engagement system: alignment, improvement, and readiness. And they all interconnect, but they are separate in some of their components, and I'm going to go over high level those details. So as you start to look at the different tiers within your organization, tier one would be an example of maybe a frontline clinic or a support area, those who do maybe finance, billing, a call center. Tier 5, people who are interacting with your patients in the health system. Tier 5 would be your CEOs, that's the highest tier. And so you can see along the spectrum, everyone touches alignment, improvement, and readiness. But the proportion of how much you spend on that daily huddle or your daily engagement system on that aspect depends on kind of where you're at with the organization. So at tier 1, there's a lot of just readiness. Am I ready to serve my patients today? So that's why you see there's larger readiness area, but there's always going to be an element of improvement. Then as you get towards your CEO, they're looking more at goal deployment. And so is the organization in alignment with all the strategies that we're doing on our tier 1s. So as you'll see some of the examples of the huddle boards and the Excel files that represent the virtual huddle board, you'll see that the framework is the same. They all have these components, but the percentage of how much you're focused on alignment versus readiness will change by tier. So readiness is probably one of the most tangible and intuitive elements as we've begun to roll this out at UC San Diego Health. I think people find it pretty easy, particularly in a healthcare setting. A lot of teams already are doing their huddles and rounds, but it's teaching them to make sure that they're huddling with a purpose. And so the first piece is just making the work visible. So we ask teams to try and get a huddle board. It can be a whiteboard, or in some areas, as you get to the higher tiers, you have a lot of different locations. So coming together for a huddle board is a little difficult. So you'll have a virtual huddle board via Skype, and it'll be an Excel file. The daily huddles we'll go over in a little bit, kind of why daily, but the idea is that it's a practice and a habit. They're short. Standing, a lot of people ask, why do you have to stand? It's because it's not a meeting, it's a huddle. It's kind of rapid fire. Let's make sure we're on the same page. And then if there's actions where we need to problem solve, you take it outside of the huddle, maybe in another meeting. And then the escalation. So when you see something that's red, and we'll go over kind of what the colors of when to escalate are, but if you see something that's an issue or that you need help with, how do you escalate? And making sure it's not about the people, but a process, a standardized process for escalating your problems. And creating bi-directional communication, which leads us to the tiered huddles. So when you escalate, having tiered huddles so that every level of the organization is in sync and you're closing that loop of communication. Are there any questions about readiness? So why daily? So there's always kind of ups and downs in your daily operations. There's problems that come up. Sometimes when you have a big problem come up, you can see here, if you didn't proactively anticipate it, it takes you a longer amount of time to get back to your normal day-to-day routine. But if you're able to huddle daily and proactively think, what do I need today or later this week, then you're able to get ahead of some of those problems. Not saying you can eliminate every problem, but when they do happen, it doesn't derail you. Typically, people who are in this state feel like they're firefighting. I never have time to do my improvement work because I'm always solving problems. And this is kind of one of the first pieces that we say, if you can get your daily readiness up and running, you might start to build in some of that time where you're less firefighting and you have a little bit more time to be proactive on some of your improvement projects. So when you do identify a problem, then how do you reach out for help? This is the tiered help chain escalation process. So if this was, say, a clinic, this would be your nurses, your physicians, your LVNs, meeting with that clinic manager, sharing whatever they need to share for that day or that week. If that manager, if there was something that was escalated to the manager and they could not solve it at that level, then they would escalate it to their director. And so typically in the ambulatory setting, you start to see the virtual huddle boards here because the clinics are in multiple locations. On an inpatient setting, some of your teams are more co-located, so it's a little bit easier to maybe actually have some in-person huddle boards. So the idea is that all the managers from the different areas would get on a call or come to that director's huddle board, share whatever they needed help with. If the director could solve it at that level, then the problem's resolved. The manager would receive that communication and maybe at the next day's huddle or in a week or two, whenever that problem is resolved, close the loop about how that escalated issue got addressed. And then it would continue all the way up to your CEO. We've also added the facilitation and coaching. Sometimes when your organization is new to doing huddles, you just need a third party kind of coach to help you say, did you capture that as an action item? Little things of, okay, we're problem solving. This is a huddle, not the meeting. We need to take this outside. And then one of the most important pieces of the daily engagement system is it's allowing everything to become visible, and it increases the accountability. You're making the processes visible of what your teams are doing. You're making the work that they're doing visible. The measures, are you holding yourself to certain metrics? Maybe sometimes you feel like you're doing a great job, but you want to be able to tell that story. And then making the problems visible. So, sometimes if you escalated something, but it was only verbal, but if your director has to see it read across your board throughout the week, they're going to realize, wow, you had to live with that problem for a whole week. So it increases the visibility of that problem, so it doesn't, out of sight, out of mind, doesn't happen. These are a few of the fences that we've put up within the health system. Again, these are not ones that we recommend for every organization. There's I think a range of full freedom and having a lot of standardization. And so you really have to know the culture of the organization you're trying to implement DES into. And so at UCSD Health, we're kind of in the middle of, okay, this is a very large organization. There's a lot of different clinical needs or administrative needs. We don't want to be super prescriptive, but we want to have enough standardization so that leaders across the organization can go into different areas and see one board and kind of understand how it works and go to the next and still be able to pull that information off of it. So these were the loose they're hard fences, but these were the general fences that we came up with. The times in which the tiers had to complete. So tier 1, which was like your clinics, would be done by 8:30 a.m. so that they could jump on to the tier 2 with the director by 9 a.m. Tier 3 by 9:30, which was like your senior director or VP, and then your COO at tier 4 by 10:30 a.m. So every day by 11 a.m., your CEO would know, have a pulse of what's going on within the organization from a readiness standpoint. The alignment and the improvement piece is something that does take a little bit more time. We'll go into that in a little bit, but that's something that doesn't necessarily have to be done daily, especially for those tier 1s. It might be something that's done on a weekly basis. And then for the actual construction of the board, again, just having a few key terms that were standardized, but how you want to show that on your board. That was the freedom for the adoption so that departments can make it their own. But we wanted to make sure we're using kind of the same terms so that when you say, I was read on the F part of steps F, everyone kind of knows what that means. And then going back to what I mentioned earlier, the red or green status. We don't have the color yellow. A lot of people with project management backgrounds, which is me, felt uncomfortable with that in the beginning. But then we realized, I think it works very well. It basically forces people to have to make a decision. Red is not necessarily bad. It just means we need to act on it. And so you're starting to move less of this, well, it's high risk, but I don't think we need to do anything about it. You basically have to make a decision. Am I good to go for today, or do I need to do something tangible to resolve this issue? And should it be escalated to a higher tier? So I think the red and green is really a great visual management system. And it takes people away from red. Again, doesn't mean we're not doing our work right. It means I need help in that tiered system. This was a framework that we came up with. A lot of places call it different things, but for our daily readiness, we have the staff go through, are we red or green on staffing, technology, equipment, processes, supplies, and facilities. And this has been a tremendous success. We had a few clinics open up, and they use steps every morning as the teams were coming together to try and get the clinic up and running for their first opening day. So that was a big success from a healthcare standpoint. The next piece is alignment, and I'll show you some examples later, but this is really looking at the goal deployment, having your metrics, what are your goals within the organization. At UCSD, their quality, service, efficiency, people, and financial. And then how is every level within the organization working towards that institutional goal? So there will be an institutional goal for each of these columns. And then how is that nurse in the clinic making sure that her work's meaningful and helping our CEO meet that financial goal or that quality goal? So that's the idea of alignment. Improvement, you can use the A3 problem thinking, the PDCA, and everyday ideas. So improvement will vary based on the tier. If you're tier 1, it might be something kind of small within your scope of control. So maybe it's moving a printer from the far left side of the clinic to the right, so you reduce the waste of motion for that staff member. But at a tier 4, your CEO might be looking at your capital request process. So it's scaled to whatever your role is within the organization. We like to use PIC as a frame of mind. So when someone submits a form with an area of opportunity, we say, is it low effort and low impact? Maybe it's possible. Is it low effort and high impact? We should probably implement it. Is it high effort and high impact? It's going to be a challenge, so do we have the bandwidth and the time? And is it high effort and low impact? We might want to kibosh that idea. But we always keep a little packet of those kiboshed ideas because you don't want to throw ideas out. The idea is maybe sometimes in 2 months, someone says, actually, that wasn't really that high effort. It's actually impossible. And so you could pull that idea out and make sure that that person feels like their voice was still heard. And then lastly, doing some type of swim lane if you have the space to track once it is selected, to track the progress of it. It could be the PDCA model, it could be build, implement, and then you have a complete folder. But the idea is that you want to track where as a team, you go over all the ideas, you put them up on the board and you say, what do we want to prioritize? And you pick 1 or 2. And as a Kanban, if this lane is empty, it's signaling we have bandwidth for a new improvement idea. And it helps everyone in that team be on the same page about what's the priority and why their idea might not have been implemented immediately. Maybe we need to pick this other idea. So when you put them all together, a lot of your alignment pieces, some of your daily readiness in alignment will give birth to improvement ideas. And so they all start to connect, and they're separate elements within the board, but they're all connected in terms of how we do our daily work. So this is an example at UC San Diego Health. We just took this picture like a few days ago. This is the readiness section. And while it doesn't take up the majority of the board, it takes up the majority of the daily huddle time. So that's where this 60% of your readiness is focused on talking about this section of the board. Do we have the staff? Are we red or green for the week? You can track those trends. If you're red in an area, you might want to start to do root cause analysis. Why? Maybe that needs to be escalated. Here's your action items: who, what, when, best practice. If the date's passed, scratch it off and put a new date on top. It holds people accountable rather than erasing because they can see how many times they moved their date. So again, this is kind of the perks of having a physical whiteboard where you can write on it. Announcements and recognition are really important for acknowledging all the hard work that the staff are doing. And then this is your alignment. So you're really looking at those pillars, like I said, the institutional goals. And these are your department goals. If your organization is starting on DES, maybe your CEO doesn't necessarily know what the institutional goals are yet. They're still in the works. Sometimes you can have a senior leader, like a chief administrative officer or a VP, set for that department some goals that they've committed to that CEO for the year. And you might be able to start here and work down. So you don't have to have every single executive in your organization on board to start, kind of start where you're at. But the ideal is goal deployment from the top that you can start with. And then this row looks at what's the current performance. So our department set our goal. Where's the gap? Where are we now versus what our goal is? You want to set these goals for your current performance maybe on a monthly basis. If it's an annual goal, you don't want to be in the red for the whole year. maybe you say this month, how should we be on track? Because that can keep people motivated. This is the root cause analysis. So we have a gap. What are the drivers and what are the contributors to that? Maybe you do a fishbone, 5 whys, check marks of getting the staff to come and physically engage with the board and say why we're not meeting that goal. And then the last is, okay, now we figured out why we're not meeting that goal. What are we going to do about it? What's our countermeasures? What are we going to test? And hopefully we can start to see a change in their performance. This is an image of one of the nurses leading the huddle. The roles do rotate. It's not supposed to always be the manager as well. You want every staff member to use the standard work for how to run a huddle and feel involved. This is an example of a pick chart. So they have their pockets. This is when it was first set up. And once they have an idea selected, then they'll put it through that process. And when a lane is open, they'll pull a new idea. And this is a tier 2 board. So this is the director's board. You can see there's a little bit more on alignment, but it still follows in general the same format as what that physical huddle board had. Same goals and things like that. All right, so I'll hand it over to Mike to go over the other tiers.
Thanks a lot. Hi everybody, I'm Mike. So we looked at tier 1 and tier 2. So remember, what's tier 1 again organizationally? Frontline, yeah. So for us, it's clinics. It's a department that hopefully dealing directly with your customers, in that case, patients. And talking to a group like a clinic staff about having a daily huddle is sort of a conversation, because they get ready for patients every day right now. They have it ever since they've been doing their jobs. And so starting the readiness part of the daily engagement system at the clinic level is very intuitive and it happens quickly. But as you get to the tier 2 and tier 3, so tier 3 will be senior director or vice president, we get some pushback. Why do we need a daily 10-minute meeting? Why do I need to know what's going on with things? They've got my phone number. And so at some point, we're often saying, if we've got support organizationally, we're saying, trust us. Just let's test this, see what happens. And so the story in our organization, we've only been doing tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4 for a couple of months. Melinda and I both joined in April, and we're still really designing the system. The very first week that we had tier 4, which is our chief operating officer, the very first week, second day, there's an issue that had been raised at the tier 1 level that day, made it all the way through to the chief operating officer because nobody below that could solve it. And it was the need for an EKG machine, electrocardiogram machine. And it hadn't been planned in the capital. The previous one had broken. We need it today. So by 10 o'clock on the day that that was discovered, the chief operating officer knew that there was that need. Now, did that mean they had one by 5 o'clock? Of course not. This is a big issue. But what happened was interesting, because 2 days later in the huddle that week, on Wednesday, the COO was asked for another one from a different clinic. So he said 2 things. He said, I will get you those machines because I understand we need them. You know, you'll have to justify that the previous one is irreparable. And I know how to get unplanned capital. I will make that happen. But I also want this to happen. He turned to his chief financial officer and he said, we need to look at the capital planning process. I'm getting way too many unplanned capital requests. So that's the kind of thing that, would that have come out eventually? Probably. It may have taken a couple of months for that to emerge from the depths of the organization to the chief operating officer staff. So part of this is the speed of communication, and part of it is the focus. In a 10-minute huddle, you can only talk about so many things. You talk about the most important. So we're at the tier 3 one now, which is senior director or vice president. The mixture of the time and the focus has changed. Now it's 60% alignment and much less on readiness. And they may not have a board, but we don't have any at this level that have a physical board that people stand in front of and huddle, because they've all got multiple locations. And so what this looks like is a fairly customized spreadsheet. And these just emerged when we started. We didn't prescribe any of this. We had the vision in people's heads. Oh, that's what a whiteboard looks like. I'm going to try and recreate that in Excel. And then in the first couple of weeks, there were probably 20 changes to that spreadsheet. And it's gradually settled into, yeah, this works for us. So I know you can't read it from there, This is the quality, service, efficiency, people, and financial goals. So this is all about alignment. And this senior director chooses to talk about that on a daily basis. So it might seem a bit odd to talk about annual goals every day, but it's pretty powerful in terms of knowing where you are and knowing if people actually know what their goal is. We're interviewing people in perioperative services at the moment to do this, and that's the operating rooms, the surgeons, etc. And we asked someone on Tuesday, just yesterday, so do you have goals? Yes, and I'll cut the conversation way short. Our goals are to grow revenue and improve patient satisfaction. Those are sort of intentions that direct. You can't measure those. And so one of the things that this brings to the surface often when we're implementing it is your people don't know what your goals are. How do you expect them to help you to achieve them if we're not communicating what the organizational goal is and what their role in meeting that goal is? So this senior director talks about quality Mondays, service Tuesdays, etc. And this is the steps: the staffing, technology, equipment, process, supplies, and facilities. And they developed their own fun norm. They said, we're going to have these Bitmojis to represent everybody at a huddle. So they do it electronically like this, and you saw, you may have noticed on the slide that Melinda showed you, that they actually have laminated Bitmojis on their huddle boards. Tier 4, so Chief Operating Officer. Why on earth do I need to call every day? Trust us, let the process work. We were kind of lucky that a big issue came up in the week 1, because now the Chief Operating Officer, Brandon Kramer, first time he's experienced this, owning this process, he's sold on this already. He's like, yes, I will come to this as many days as possible. Probably not going to be every day because the organization bombards executives with meetings. But he's rearranging his calendar to come to it. Now you're up to sort of 70% online, ideally. We're not there yet because one of the things I'm going to show you in a second is where we are with the Tier 4 goals. Another spreadsheet, it's similar. This is the steps bit. You go red, green for each of these direct reports to the COO. There's action items over here. There's announcements. Recognition is a mandatory part of every board at every level. So just this morning at the Tier 4 huddle, there were 4 people acknowledged, and they could be from any level in the organization. So it gives visibility to people, and it makes people at all levels feel more connected. And the culture at UCSD is very supportive and collaborative anyway, so we get a lot of recognition. And then for the COO, the Chief Operating Officer huddle, there's a tendency, because it's on the phone and people are sitting down, there could be a tendency to have a meeting right then and there. But what they have is the discipline to say, at our next staff meeting, which is Tuesday afternoons at 4, this needs to go on the agenda. So they've actually found it very helpful to take some things out of that staff meeting and deal with them on a daily basis, but put focus on others in staff meetings. So that's Tier 4 electronically, but this is basically all readiness. Where's the goals? Where's the progress against the goals? They're still working that out. You definitely can't read this, but I wanted to highlight that why are we having this huddle is answered every day on the screen for you. And that says, are we ready to serve our patients today without harm and without delay? So you've got VPs remembering, getting that reminder every day. That's what we're here for. And my job is to support the people who look after patients. This is actually what their alignment board looked like this morning. I took this morning. It's in a sort of atrium part of that building. The same lines as Melinda described. So what's the overall UCSD health goal? What's our overall ambulatory goal? What are the outcomes we're going to track? What are the drivers? And so on. This has been changing every week for about 8 weeks. And what the implementation of a daily engagement system for us highlighted, the biggest gap was not only that people didn't know the goals, we didn't have goals. So you could ask an individual like the CEO, what are your goals? He's got incentive goals for his bonus, but they weren't cascaded through the enterprise. And so I think one of the most powerful long-term things we're going to achieve in this area is to actually figure out that we need goals that we can articulate. If anyone not heard of a SMART goal format? Okay, so specific, measurable, accountable, realistic. So the goals should be in that format, and then anybody, there's probably 300 people in that building right now. They walk past this board every day. We want this to be visible. We want a mutual accountability to be visible. And so that's where we are without going through any of the details. The other thing I love about this is it's messy. I don't want to see a board with nicely produced charts out of Excel and PowerPoint slides that in case the CEO comes in, we need it to look professional. I want it to be owned, and I want to know that, okay, this date down here was yesterday, and this is not all one person's writing. People are really interacting with it. Yes? Okay.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay, thank you. All right, this is just to illustrate that at every level, even at the Chief Operating Officer level, we've created standard work. And if you know anything about Lean, you'll know that standard work is seen as the basis for all improvement. So the reason for this standard work is anybody can grab this laminated sheet in that room where that huddle happens and run a huddle. It's not crazy. So back to this. Now you might see a little bit better why we generally start with readiness at the clinic level or the sort of frontline levels. But if we, let's say, if we were called in by the CEO to start from scratch, we might start with alignment and cascade that down. So we're kind of doing parallel deployment at the moment, and we honestly haven't got to much improvement yet because we need to be working the alignment goals and identifying the gap between performance and target before we know what we're trying to improve on. Otherwise, you're kind of doing random improvements. And so this is revisiting that overall slide. I want to cover one more topic very quickly, which is leader standard work. It's kind of the hardest to explain, sounds the most sort of theoretical. But in the same way that lean systems depend on and work on standard work for any operation, when we're trying to change habits and change mindsets towards a daily engagement system, we talk about leaders creating their own standard work. And then you get a conversation of what is lead standard work? Well, leader standard work is simply standard work for leaders. In other words, it's something you commit to yourself, hopefully your boss and your direct reports as well, because these are managers we're talking about, leaders. Standard work to help remind me that my job isn't to go around and fix problems. It's not to go around and tell people what to do. It's to ask questions like, in this area, do we know what the standard we have for checking a patient into our clinic is? Can you show me where that is? How would you know how to do that? What do you do when a new employee comes on board? So all these kinds of very open-ended questions as a coach. And in terms of leader standard work, you would expect someone at the CEO, Chief Executive Officer level, not to have a lot of routine. And so we tend to say that the managers leading frontline staff are going to have more structured leader standard work than someone who's an executive. This is a fairly standard lean slide, and it really says that making improvements, continuous improvements, feels like pushing a rock uphill. And standardization, and specifically leader standard work, is that chalk that helps you not to backslide. I'm going to skip this a second and just show you. So this is the leader standard work. I took a photo of this last night from a director in primary care. And all I want to point out is it's handwritten. It's on his whiteboard. He can change it whenever he wants because he owns this. If it's not working for him, he should change it. If it's not working because he's being called into too many meetings by his boss, for example, then he can call his boss into his office and say, look, we agreed that I was going to do these daily and these weekly. I'm just not able to get around to it because, frankly, you're calling all these meetings. So you can have that kind of discussion. So there's things I want to do daily, weekly, and monthly, and I'm going to try and build new habits. This is his boss's board. Not coincidentally, looks very similar without going into the detail. They're both acknowledging that I want to become a different kind of leader, and that's going to take exercising and building new muscles, and we're going to hold each other accountable for this through the leader standard work. So the last slide really, it's Deming said, if you haven't heard of Deming, you should have, basically, if you're at this conference. W. Edwards Deming, it's not enough to do your best. So it's not enough to just say, go for it, I'm here to help. You need to know what to do. So leader standard work is knowing what to do. And then probably the best book, resource on daily management is Creating a Lean Culture by David Mann. And he says standard work for leaders is the highest leverage tool in a lean management system. So it's very important. Questions? I have an FAQ if you don't ask me any questions. Yes, please.
Yes, I just want to make sure that I have this right. So there's a daily huddle where staff tells management about their readiness. What do I not have today that I need to get the job done? What do you want me to do? If they identify a problem that needs to be solved at the staff level, that is tripped to a separate meeting.
It may or may not be. An amazing amount of issues get solved on the spot. So let's take an example. A clinic says, okay, Julie and Chad both called in sick this morning, and I can only get one float nurse in, so we're short one medical assistant. If that can't be solved at a clinic level, when the manager looks at the board, because the manager might not be at the huddle, they don't run the huddle, they'll look and they'll see we're short one MA, medical assistant. At the next level huddle, they'll point that out. They'll say, I'm red on staffing. And very often, someone else on the call says, oh, actually, you can have one of ours. We're pretty low volume today. I'll Dr. So-and-so with me. And so the purpose of this is to get issues resolved at the appropriate level. One of the fears of executives early on is, you mean everything's going to get escalated to me? No, actually less will get escalated to you. But what is escalated to you will deserve to be escalated to you. So if it's resolvable by staff, all it may need is the manager to say, yeah, you have authority to go change that. If they need help, then the first supporter is the manager, the next supporter is the director. So,
Engaging the staff in problem solving.
it's typically if it requires some kind of a meeting or time to be put into it, you would say yes. And where you record it, I'm not going to flip through the slides back, but there's a who, what, and when action item section on every board. You would say, okay, so Chad, you're going to take that. That's urgent, has to be done by the end of the day. So let's report back on that tomorrow.
And to your point, there's kind of different levels of how deep you problem solve. So maybe you're in the huddle and you say, I need X, Y, and Z, and someone says, you know what, I can help you with that. That didn't get escalated to a director. It stayed at the appropriate level, becomes an action item. Someone says, I need a new EKG machine. That's not going to get solved at that problem. You don't need to have a 10-minute conversation about where we could find one. You would maybe take that as an action and bring it to maybe another meeting or escalate it to the next tier huddle.
And early on, depending on your culture, it's really important to say thank you for bringing that problem forward. A red is not bad. In fact, red is an opportunity for improvement. From a redness point of view, I'm glad we caught that so it doesn't affect our patients. From a goal point of view, well, we're not going to meet this goal by the end of the year if we don't do something differently. So you need to encourage the mindset that not only is red not bad, it's great because it's an opportunity. If I see a board that's all green for a week, well, either you've got some cultural fear there, or we just may have set the bar too well. Okay, raise the bar till you get some reds. You don't want it all red, you don't want it all green.
You brought up about the recognition. Was that at all boards, or is it just at the tier 3?
It's at all, yes. Yeah, it is. There's the fences that Melinda talked about. As we're expanding from just the clinic setting, the ambulatory setting, to perioperative services, ORs, imaging, labs, we're having to really be careful not to define too many fences and say this bit's mandatory. So for that, we're saying somewhere on your board or somewhere in your tracker at every level, have the steps for readiness, have recognition, have action items, have announcements, and have the goals. How you do it, what it looks like in your area, it's kind of up to you. Now, at a level of, say, a director, they may say, look, I've got 9 clinics. I don't want 9 completely different formats. So I'm going to set some fences of my own so that they look like they all belong together. And we're getting some of that. But yeah, recognition is one of the mandated things. Any other questions?
What are your strategies for sustaining this process?
Well, the great thing about this, 2 things. First of all, if you remember back to the bicycle, the whole front wheel of the bicycle really is all about sustainment. So one of the very reasons for this to be in existence, for the daily engagement system to be in existence, is to sustain improvements elsewhere. The other thing is, being a daily process, yes, there's some goals you might talk about weekly, monthly, but essentially at its heart, this is a daily process. Every day you have a chance to see whether it's working and improve it, or give recognition that it's working great. So it's self-sustaining unless it's sabotaged, essentially. If you're getting support from a decent level of leader, and why I say decent level, it doesn't have to be the CEO. The higher, the better. But in our case, our biggest champion is our chief operating officer, COO. If he left and got replaced by someone who didn't believe in this stuff, it could fall apart overnight almost. I worked at Stanford Children's Health for 7 years, and in Stanford Adult Hospital, they had one of the strongest lean leaders I'd ever worked with, James Harrington. He left, And the new CEO and the new COO came in. They literally took stuff down on the wall. Well, they didn't, they had someone else. But they literally dismantled the system. It was so disheartening for the people who had built it. And it was a real eye-opener for us who do this work all the time, that even when you think it's taken roots, you know, even trees with big roots fall over every now and then if the wind's strong.
And on a day-to-day basis, one of the best practices we've done for sustainment is kind of a checklist, like what are the norms, the standards that we want to have. So before the huddle starts, what we do is, well, at the end of each huddle, we'll say, okay, did we follow the standard work? Did we start and end on time? Did we rotate roles? It's kind of how you should conduct your daily huddle. And if we have an X on something, then we mark it red. And then the start of the next day's huddle, we'll review and say, guys, we didn't start and end on time yesterday. Let's try and keep the conversation a little bit more focused, or we weren't accountable for our commitments. You know, do we need to change some of these dates and push it back so that they're realistic on the action items? So that helps with the sustainment. And actually, we've noticed a few things that we need to improve on. And so we said, okay, why is this always getting an X? What do we maybe need to change about our standard?
In our own huddle.
In our own huddle as coaches, because we do our own huddle with our team. And we've said, okay, maybe we need to update our standard work because we're always red on that. So again, it's kind of encouraging that problem solving mentality.
So you do have boards all over your office, or?
Well, we're a couple of months into deploying this. So we had a pilot clinic, and that pilot clinic was part of primary care. And the primary care world has about 15 clinics, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're almost all live with daily engagement system. And then we have surgical specialties, which is different from primary care and medical specialties. So those organizations we just started. And then there's other whole organizations that we just had the first meeting with this week. So we're at different stages. But we like to think that a year from now, if we took you on again, but i.e. where the work's done, that you would see boards everywhere. You would see that they were interacted and owned locally, but there was some pattern and standard. And that if you said, hey guys, how about we just take this board down? It's kind of a pain to huddle. In fact, our colleague who came from Toyota and has done this healthcare lead for a while, he said if you're really strict, you could go in overnight and take the board down and see what people say. And if you get a revolution, then you've done a good job at making it stick. So, yeah, we don't have boards everywhere yet. We are ordering a lot of them.
Okay. We do this every day in my department. And is there a way to get a coach from your team to like just kind of listen in on one of our calls? Because we deviate a lot, I've noticed. I think going to give you some objective insight.
And what do you work?
Occupational medicine.
Sure. Yeah, why don't you send an email to Melinda or me, and we can talk about it, because the part is we love this stuff anyway. So even if it's not officially an area we're working with, if you're already doing it especially, and you just want sort of an outside pair of eyes, happy to.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. There was one more question.
Yeah, well, we have a department where everyone, we don't have really one central location where everybody goes to every day. Everyone's very spread out
Okay.
across the system. So how would you recommend implementing something like this where physical whiteboard would
Well, that's where you might have a physical whiteboard where the majority of people are, or even in the leader's role, at the leader's office, let's say. But you'd set up a phone call, depending on the cadence. So our senior directors, it would be a 9 a.m. phone call. You'd use Zoom or Skype. You'd have a spreadsheet, like I showed you, the Excel spreadsheet. It's really easy to build. And you'll just start setting the expectation. Okay, this is a high priority meeting every day. I expect people to be here unless you've got something really important that you have to get to, and in which case, try and give your information to someone else so they can represent you. We don't need you at every meeting, but we need you represented. And honestly, just start and let it sort of speak for itself. Obviously, there's some seeding you have to do in terms of why, but yeah, it's pretty straightforward for the readiness bit, and you could do alignment later once you've got those daily improvements.
And I would say don't have a physical board and an Excel sheet though. Pick which one works best, because one's not going to be updated, and then you'll be confused about where you track that.
Anytime you've got two sources of information,
Yeah.
they will get it.
Pick whatever works best.
Okay, looks like time's up. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well,
these slides will be posted within a week on the Process Palooza site, and you will receive a survey. Please fill it out. It will help us to improve this stuff for next year as well. So thank you.